This is Ambazonia Calling. News, analysis, commentary, opinion, editorials. Ambazonia Calling is a co-production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. Welcome. My name is Ntumfoyn Herbert, and I bring revolutionary greetings from our studios in Washington, D.C. to all of you, friends of Ambazonia and fellow Ambazonians on Ground Zero and across the globe.
Independence is both the destination and the destiny of every Ambazonian. That includes all ye Ambalanders living in and or working for the Republic of Cameroon. This is the monk.
It was hard to miss the internal contradiction when the UN boss Antonio Guterres praised the liberating role assumed by liberation movements against Portugal, but failed to recognize the role played by movements in Ambazonia. This is Tanya Jude Agua Ozogen.
This was a nonsense war, and that it had to be stopped, and the only way to stop it was the revolution in Lisbon, the Carnation Revolution that led to democracy in my country and to the independence of the Portuguese former colonies.
Antonio Guterres does not only understand the plight of Ambazonians, but that he has a full grasp of their zeal and determination to courageously fend off any attempts and or talks of exterminating them. This is Manjong Jude Ambe.
Ambazonians know what international law and UN resolutions require of them. Delay can only prolong our stay in Egypt. This is Willibrod Ade.
Sporadic gunfire was reported in Mutengene, a crossroads town in Ambazonia's southern zone. This is Innocentia.
Ambazonians need to prove that what the liberation movements argue is indeed the expression of the will of the people of Ambazonia. And there is no better way of proving the will of the people than organizing a ballot. This is C. Ajin for Ambi.
Money donated for a good cause without a good plan for the implementation is money wasted. This is Lambert Mbom.
We have a lot to get to in this edition of Ambazonia Calling, and we must begin by thanking you again for joining us and for accepting to spend a part of your Sunday with us. We will begin as we have never done before, by delaying both our weekly editorial and our news wrap-up in favor of what we believe is the biggest story we have to share with you today. Ambazonia Calling has been reliably informed that the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has been trying frantically to provide both a bold and lasting solution to the colonial war ongoing in the Cameroons. His efforts, we have learned, have been frustrated by the very architecture of the United Nations Security Council and the pledge by 2 of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council to use their veto power to prevent the implementation of any such solution, so long as that solution does not, in their opinion, uphold the one and indivisible Cameroon. The 2 members of the Security Council will continue to be virulently opposed to a solution that would grant independence to Ambazonia are France and China. The other 3 members, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, are supportive of an approach that would end the violence immediately and that would, at the barest minimum, return to the full respect of Resolution 1608, meaning a return to the deal signed off on by the United Nations in 1961, the one that created a confederation of 2 states equal in status. It is not that France and China are offering any solutions, except from insisting that the ongoing war in the Cameroons is an internal Cameroonian affair. The 2 Security Council members are opposed to the Council evoking the responsibility to protect, which could involve the deployment of United Nations peacekeepers. France and especially China fear that a resolution of the crisis that favors Ambazonia could have damning consequences on China's claim to sovereignty over Taiwan and eventually over Tibet and Hong Kong. The French fear that a successful breakaway by Ambazonia could signal the beginning of the collapse of France's colonial stranglehold on 14 West and Central African countries. The non-permanent members to the Security Council, including the African countries on the Council, support the solution offered by the United Nations Secretary General in favor of decolonization and an end to a war that everyone agrees, including France, cannot be won by any of the parties.
What Cameroon has done to us, I want you never to forget. The pain they have brought to bear on this generation, I want you never to forget. Not out of hate, but so that the next generation will remember and make sure they do the things they are supposed to do, never to go through this again.
I will continue to play my part to ask the people of Southern Cameroon to take their revolution into their hands and continue the fight to liberate themselves.
I'm sorry to say, because of France's policies in Africa, in French Africa, the state of La République du Cameroon do not have any pressure on them to find a way to resolve this issue, because they are always thinking that no matter what happens, France will always be there to give them coverage.
Still ahead in this edition, we have The Devil Unmasked with Professor Emmanuel Tatamenta. We have a winner of the Nyamfuka of the Week. And we are not done until you have heard our letter to Joshua. So stay tuned, kick back, relax, and enjoy Ambazonia Calling.
We have a series of reports on the latest outing by the UN Secretary General. We will offer explanations. We will analyze why the UN Secretary General offered a convoluted answer to a simple, straightforward question last week on the war unfolding in Cameroon.
Je suis basé au Cameroun. Je voudrais savoir quel est votre point de vue sur la situation des droits de l'homme dans la région du Nord-Ouest, de l'arrestation de certains opposants et ainsi de suite. Merci.
As you will remember, he was in Addis Ababa attending the African Union Summit.
C'est évident que le Conseil de sécurité a été formé quand le monde était différent.
And the question came up about the ongoing war in Ambazonia, and instead of answering the question directly, the UN Secretary General spent more than a minute and a half explaining his frustrations with the architecture of the United Nations and blaming the world system for subjugating Africa to a second kind of colonization by denying it representation at the level of the most powerful institutions of the world.
Dans les institutions internationales ne correspond pas à la réalité africaine d'aujourd'hui. Et ça, c'est particulièrement vrai dans le cas dans le contexte du Conseil de sécurité. Moi, j'ai toujours dit qu'il n'y aurait pas une réforme complète des Nations Unies sans réforme du Conseil de sécurité, mais nous connaissons aussi les difficultés de cette réforme du Conseil de sécurité. C'est évident que l'Afrique est aujourd'hui sous-représentée face à ce que le continent africain représente lui-même.
Here is Antonio Guterres before the UN General Assembly 4th Committee on Decolonization.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, in my capacity as President pro tempore, it is my honor to open the 2019 session of the Special Committee. As you know, the decolonization agenda is an area close to my heart and to which I reiterate my commitment. Many of you are aware that I was born in Portugal during Salazar's dictatorship, a dictatorship that not only oppressed the Portuguese people, but oppressed the people of the former Portuguese colonies. And as you also know, we got rid of our dictatorship with the Carnation Revolution in 1974. But I will never forget that that revolution was only possible thanks to the action of the liberation movements, Frelimo in Mozambique, MPLA in Angola, PAIGC in Guinea, today Guinea-Bissau, that made the Portuguese military understand that this was a nonsense war and that it had to be stopped, and the only way to stop it was the revolution in Lisbon, the Carnation Revolution that led to democracy in my country and to the independence of the Portuguese former colonies. And I remember when I was a boy to see in the propaganda of the regime very negative references to the Committee of the 24. So it's for me something very emotional that having, of course, lived with enormous intensity the freedom of my country and the freedom of the Portuguese former colonies, to be for some minutes President pro tempore of the same Committee of the 24. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, decolonization helped to transform the United Nations membership, propelling the organization's growth from 51 original members to 193 today. Decolonization is one of the most significant chapters of the organization's history. But this story is still being written as 17 non-self-governing territories remain. Each deserves attention. Each still waits to attain self-government in accordance with Chapter 9 of the United Nations Charter, the 1960 Declaration of the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, and relevant UN resolutions. In recent months, there has been notable movement on the question of New Caledonia. Last November, in a referendum, New Caledonians expressed their will on their future and on the status of the territory. This was an important step forward in the decolonization process. The cooperation of France, the administering power, throughout the referendum process, in accordance with 98 Nouméa Accord, was commendable. This committee, for its part, assisted New Caledonia in the period leading up to the conduct of the referendum, dispatching 2 visiting missions to the territory. To achieve decolonization, the voices of the peoples of the territories should be heard, as it was the case. The cooperation of all concerned, including the administrative powers, is likewise vital. And it is also paramount that the peoples of the non-self-governing territories understand the options regarding their political status and the right to choose their future freely. I applaud the Special Committee's tireless efforts to uphold its mandate and to support the peoples of the non-self-governing territories to achieve self-government. And I also commend the Special Committee for maintaining dialogue and productive cooperation with the administrating powers and all concerned. The UN's decolonization success across the decades can inspire us today. Let us uphold our duty to assist all the peoples of the non-self-governing territories in bringing their decolonization process to a successful conclusion according to their own choice. The Special Committee has accompanied many territories in their journey since the beginning of the 60s. As you begin work in the 2019 session, I wish you every success, and the Secretariat will do all we can to support your very important work. Thank you.
That was UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. Following up on his remarks, our team has spent some time analyzing exactly why the UN scribe spoke the way he did, what his words mean, and what is unfolding in the background according to our investigations, and why this speech should be treated more seriously than any other by the UN boss in the recent times with respect especially to the decolonization of Ambazonia. And despite the fact that the word Ambazonia, the country Ambazonia, was not once mentioned in those remarks. Remarkably, Secretary-General Guterres breaks away from his prepared remarks. He chooses to dwell in an emotional recollection of the independence struggles of former Portuguese colonies in Africa. Perhaps the most remarkable thing the UN Secretary-General does is that he decides to pay deserving tribute to the pro-independence liberation movement in the former Portuguese colonies. For what that exactly means for liberation movements in Ambazonia, here is Tanya Jude Agua Ozugen.
pro-independence liberation movements in Ambazonia, all the restoration forces forced by the war declared on Ambazonia to take up arms in self-defense must take heart. Even the top employer of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, recognized this week that African liberation movements have played a historic and a praiseworthy role in bringing freedom to peoples living under colonial domination, as well as people like citizens of his native Portugal trapped under dictatorship. It is hard to see how Antonio Guterres can praise the liberating role assumed by liberation movements in Angola, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, and Mozambique against Portugal, and fail to recognize the role played by movements such as the ADF, SOCADEF, the Tigers, Seven Katas, ASC, AMF, the Royal Pythons against recolonization by neighboring Republic of Cameroon and its official sponsor, France. In Ambazonia, as in the former Portuguese colonies, the struggles involve the forces of good, the liberation movements, and the forces of evil, the colonialists. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres chose a very important speech to remind the world of where he stands on issues on the debate, clarifying the role played by liberation movements. Ambazonian liberation movements can be reassured that they are on the side of justice, so long as they avoid war crimes, do not target civilians, do not commit crimes against humanity, and maintain the support of the people by demonstrating at all times that their involvement in the war is to win freedom and independence for Ambazonia, not to advance any criminal activities such as ransom taking, kidnappings, and the maiming of civilians. This is Tani Jude Agua Ozugen for Ambazonia Calling.
Restoration train is going to the mountains. Restoration train is going to Bamenda. Restoration train is going on to BOYO on the restoration journey of our liberty. Restoration train is moving very steadily. Restoration train is hooting very loudly. Restoration train to carry everybody on the restoration journey of our liberty.
The 1964 Cairo Declaration on African Borders, reaffirmed in Article 4B of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, however, and signed off by the President of Cameroon, makes clear that demarcation of the territory of each African state is recognized as being such on the date of its independence. Does the United Kingdom government accept this to be the case, or not? Has there been subsequent declarations that nullify these issues on borders? If not, it would follow that French Cameroon and Ambazonia are both able to assert territorial integrity. At no time before or after its independence from France was the southern Cameroons part of that country known by its French name and style as La République du Cameroun.
So, restoration train is Ambazonian train. Whoa. Restoration, restoration train. Whoa. Restoration, restoration train. Whoa. Restoration, restoration, restoration train is going to the borders.
Part of the amazing tribute to liberation movements given by Antonio Guterres this week included lauding praise on freedom fighters in distant Africa, bringing about freedom and the collapse of dictatorships elsewhere around the world, especially in his native Portugal. Here is Barrister Manjong Jude Ambe.
A very clearly emotional Antonio Guterres opened a window into his heart and childhood in the speech before the UN General Assembly Fourth Committee on Decolonization. Nowhere more in the speech did this come through better than when he spoke of how, as a little boy, he too lived through and witnessed the brainwashing propaganda of colonial Portugal. His experience with propaganda from the regime in Lisbon is being suffered today by Ambazonians and citizens of neighboring Cameroon at the hands of the regime in colonial Yaoundé. As with the troops of Lisbon holding peoples of Africa under colonial bondage and massacring hundreds of thousands of them in a senseless and unwinnable war, the colonial regime of Paul Biya in Cameroon has embarked on a similar war against Ambazonia. The UN Secretary General all but cautioned Colonial Yaoundé. Mr. Guterres gave us reason this week to believe that he does not only understand the plight of Ambazonians, but that he has a full grasp of their zeal and determination to courageously fend off any attempts and or talks of exterminating them, and by extension, their dream and or end goal. He only fell short of declaring that Ambazonians will soon achieve that which they seek, as they fight, spill blood, and die for daily, in spite of the wanton brutality they face from Colonial Yaoundé. The wars for independence in the colonies emboldened young Portuguese military officers who learned from the African liberation movements they were sent to exterminate the value of fighting for freedom. Portugal became a free and democratic country thanks to the freedom fighters from distant Africa who were willing, as Ambazonian freedom fighters are today, to lay down their lives so that their fellow citizens may live in dignity and freedom while enjoying unfettered independence. If citizens in the colonial republics of Cameroon and France are as lucky as Mr. Guterres and fellow citizens of Portugal were in the 1970s, the war in Ambazonia would lead to freedom from tyranny for the people of neighboring Cameroon and for citizens starting off movements like the Yellow Vest movements spreading from France and all across Europe. The UN Secretary General did not say as much in his speech. Nevertheless, everything he did not say was just as powerful as what he did say. Needless stressing the fact that what was good for the liberation movements in Portuguese colonies in continental Africa must be good today for Ambazonian liberation movements combating recolonization by French Cameroon and its prime sponsor, France. After all, do not the goose and gander share that which they know and trust to be good and beneficial? This is Manjang Jude Ambe for Ambazonia Calling.
An international boundary separating French Cameroon from the southern Cameroons existed, affirmed in the Anglo-French Boundary Treaty of 1916 and confirmed in 1931. And if that be the case, would it not follow that the territory of the southern Cameroonians be recognized sitting alongside that of French Cameroon?
Ambazonia Calling. You are in the heart of the news shrine. Call us the Calacuta Republic of commentary, opinion, and editorials.
Ambazonians have to hear anew what the United Nations is insisting needs to happen in every territory, struggling to prove that it is indeed the will of the people for that territory to become fully and outrightly independent. Here's Willie Brother.
Antonio Guterres referred in his statement to other UN resolutions that apply to the decolonization process. The most important of these resolutions that should immediately come to mind for every Ambazonian listening to that speech is Resolution 1541, adopted on the 15th of December 1960 by the 948th plenary meeting of the Decolonization Committee. 3 of the 12 principles outlined in that resolution, Principles 6, 7, and 8, are crucial for Ambazonia, as we have previously argued on this program. It is in application of subsection B of Principle 6 that the UN caused our forebears to vote in the plebiscite of the 11th of February 1961 to join La République du Cameroun in a union that was doomed to fail from the very beginning. The provisions of Principles 7 and 8 provide the way out for Ambazonians, but on condition. Subsection A of Principle 7 grants the right, let me say that again, it grants the right, not a privilege, to modify the status of any union created out of the free association of any state, such as Southern Cameroon's, with the then already independent state of La République du Cameroon. Significantly, the only condition set out by the United Nations for exercising that right to modify the status of the Union, including, obviously, effecting a breakaway as Ambazonia has done since October 1st, 2017, is, and I'm quoting verbatim from the resolution, the only condition for fulfilling that modification is through the expression of their will, meaning the will of the people, using democratic means, meaning through an election. The roadmap that Morris first put out in December of 2016 appropriately insisted on the need for our people to quit giving excuses and find creative ways of getting our people to express their will through democratic means demanded for under this UN resolution. This week again, and referencing New Caledonia, Antonio Guterres insisted on the same need for elections as the democratic means by which the will of the people can be ascertained. Resolution 1541 expressly justifies the right, not the privilege. It justifies the right granted the people of Ambazonia to legally pull out of any God-forsaken union with Cameroon. This is Willibrod Ade, asking you to stay tuned to Ambazonia Calling for another readout of the rights Ambazonians have under this resolution.
Here once more is Willibrod Ade.
The right to restoration of independence, which Ambazonians have been chasing after since 2016, is recognized and justified under Resolution 1541. By the way, it is not in dispute that the UN violated not only its own charter, but also Principle 6 of this resolution. Under Principle 6, all peoples living under colonial domination have a right to 3 options to gain self-rule. I will not even discuss the fact that Southern Cameroon was already a self-governing territory from 1954 to 1961, when its self-governing status was sabotaged by the United Nations through the plebiscite. To add insult to injury, the United Nations unilaterally imposed on Southern Cameroonians at that time the obligation to choose one out of 2 options instead of one out of the 3 options set forth under Principle 6. Option 1, the right for Southern Cameroons to emerge as a sovereign independent state, subsection A of Principle 6, was not offered. The only 2 options offered were for Southern Cameroons to form a free association with an independent state provided for under subsection B, and or to accept an integration with an independent state of La République du Cameroon, as set forth under subsection C of Principle 6. Away from Principle 6, the provisions of Principle 7 grant the legal right for Ambazonia and Ambazonians to withdraw from any union. Any free association formed, and I am quoting from the resolution here, any free association had to respect the individuality and the cultural characteristics of the territory and its peoples. Even if Colonial Cameroon wants to argue that Ambazonia integrated the already independent La République du Cameroon, the resolution was clear that, and again I have to quote once more from the resolution, the peoples integrating a previously independent state retained the freedom to modify the status of that territory through the expression of their will by democratic means and through constitutional processes. The resolution did not say anywhere that such a right could be abrogated or surrendered. That is why Colonial Cameroon is out of luck trying to brandish the 20th of May 1972 hold-up on Ambazonia as a constitutional process. That referendum was organized in violation of Article 47 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Cameroon that was formed in 1961. And that article talks about the sanctity of the Confederation. The decree that Biya used in 1984 to revert to the name of La République du Cameroun cannot also be considered as having any constitutional value. However, and this is where Ambazonians truly need to sit up and do the right thing. While the Ahidjo and Biya regimes acted in violation of international law and in violation of the principles of UN Resolution 1541, the stubborn refusal by so many Ambazonian liberation movements to apply the letter and spirit of the one resolution which grants us the legal right to restore independence, to reaffirm our sovereignty as a people, and or to break away, makes us just as guilty of acting without respect for international law and UN resolutions as the Ahidjo and Biya regimes. Ambazonians know what international law and UN resolutions require of them. So let us make haste in doing the right thing. Delay can only prolong our stay in Egypt. This is Willibrod Ade for Ambazonia Calling.
Ambazonia Calling. You are in the heart of the news shrine. Call us the Kalakuta Republic of commentary, opinion, and editorials.
In several speeches made during visits to southern Cameroons by Cameroon's first dictator Ahmadou Ahidjo, he always repeatedly insisted that he had no intention of meddling in the internal affairs of West Cameroon or Ambazonia. That was before the annexationist policies of next-door Cameroon were given teeth by France and their greed overblown by the discovery of oil on the Gulf of Guinea. Here is Barrister Sia Jumvambe.
Subsection B of Principle 7 is very clear that the Ahidjo-Biya regimes had no right whatsoever to meddle in the internal affairs of Ambazonia. The resolution states that even after forming a free association or integrating an independent state, the territories concerned, in this case Ambazonia, retain the right, and I'm quoting verbatim from the resolution, the right to determine its internal constitution without outside interference in accordance with due constitutional processes and the freely expressed wishes of the people. You heard that right, Ambazonians. The earlier we organize elections, the closer we will be to unshackling the chains of colonial slavery and accelerating our march to BOYO. Even if colonial Cameroon wants to argue that Ambazonia integrated its territory, Yaoundé will still be unable to untangle itself from the legal cobwebs into which it was trapped under Principle 8. The principle states, and I'm reading verbatim again, integration with an independent state should be on the basis of complete equality between the peoples of the erstwhile non-self-governing territory and those of the independent country with which it is integrated. Principle 8 goes on to state that the peoples of both territories should have equal status and rights of citizenship and equal guarantees of fundamental rights and freedoms without any distinction or discrimination. Both should have equal rights and opportunities for representation and effective participation in all levels in the executive, legislative, and judicial organs of government. Case closed, Ambazonia. There is nothing to fear in Ambazonia's fight for the restoration of independence. This week, the Secretary General of the United Nations used his speech before the Decolonization Committee to reaffirm the three most important principles spelled out under United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1541. The only thing Ambazonians have stubbornly refused to do so far is put themselves through the discomfort of recognizing that their revolution is different from previous independence wars in that international law and UN resolutions set different expectations for breaking away from the cursed union with colonial Cameroon. Under these principles, Ambazonians need to prove that what the liberation movements argue is indeed the expression of the will of the people of Ambazonia. And there is no better way of proving the will of the people than organizing a ballot. This is C. Ajimvo Ambe for Ambazonia Calling.
This thing will go on for 50 and 100 years. You cannot kill everybody. And even if you kill everybody, the stones would avenge for the blood that spills on them. The soil will get up and start fighting.
You have plenty of show yet to come, so don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
The people of West Cameroon cannot be your slaves. The people of West Cameroon are not, you did not conquer them in war. The problem we have in West Cameroon is the problem that will bring down Cameroon. When people have had pent-up anger and pain, humiliation, for over 50 years, when it bursts out, you will never be able to control it.
They will sooner realize that the people of Ambazonia will not surrender. They will sooner realize that you can arrest and kill, but the more you arrest and kill, the more you energize the people's spirit.
That was our special report on the United Nations General Assembly Fourth Committee on Decolonization. We will now return to our regular programming, rolling off with our editorial, our news summary, and hit the devil unmasked in that order. Money solves problems and money makes problems. Lambert Baum has got an editorial for the week. It's on greenbacks.
Money, the saying goes, is the root of all evil. One place that saying has been amply borne out is with the revolution for the restoration of the independence of Ambazonia. Even as Ambazonians have embraced with overwhelming zeal the urgent need to donate, opening up their wallets to support various initiatives, money has been not only an asset it could be, but the liability every Ambazonian hopes it would cease to be. Money has unfortunately become the source of great distress and headache. No price tag can be set on independence, as evident by the priceless ultimate sacrifices made by so many heroes and sheroes in this revolution. Whatever has been invested in blood and cash, the revolution still needs a lot of money to get to the finish line. The enemy and their sponsor, France, are overloaded in cash. Yaoundé has very deep pockets, and it happens to be supported by Paris with even deeper pockets. The generosity of Ambazonians is not in doubt, even if the giving and donations come in small, stingy drips rather than in streams or rivers of cash. Any fundraising effort has been grassroots driven, based on small donors, and ran through amateur outfits, some set up to allow enough wiggle room for those keen to steal from the people's treasury, or set up with such amateurism that they cannot really be called a resource mobilization plan. Money and greed for money have assembled Ambazonians behind causes they support, but have also killed the unified approach they seek to make the liberation struggle more effective. Accusations and counter-accusations have piled up, leaving a bad taste in so many people's mouths. The omnipresent temptation for some to enrich themselves through the sweat of others and open theft from the public treasury will always exist. Sadly so. By the time all the groups are audited, you will hear long tales of waste, mismanagement, incompetency, lack of transparency and accountability. Some groups and financial accounts, such as KUPE and My Trip to BOYO, may be blamed the most for mobilizing the most money, but the truth is that even small amounts of money can have a great impact if properly managed and strategically invested. It will take more initiatives, not fewer, however much the risks of mismanagement grow with the use of more groups for Ambazonians to mobilize support from as many of our people as needed to fund our struggle. The excuse used by so many to apply what people call a Japanese handbrake to their purse and wallet is that the funds they contribute will not be managed adequately. Those who feel they know how to manage funds should please step forward and help instead of sitting back and complaining. Ambazonians must also be aware of donor fatigue. Donating to SCAPAC, my trip to BOYO, to one's favorite liberation movement, then to the refugees, to one's county and one's local government area will end up in donor fatigue. The money is coming from the same wallet. Money donated for a good cause without a good plan for the implementation is money wasted. Our success will come when we work out a plan that involves fundraising campaigns that involve our American, British, Canadian, Slovak, and Dutch friends with deep pockets. We need to be smart about raising money by leveraging our friendships. This is Lambert Mbom for Ambazonia Calling.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Here's Ntumfoyn with the first part of our news summary for the week.
Yeah, but see, here to that beginning shooter. Here to that beginning shooter.
Sporadic gunfire was reported in Mutengene, a crossroads town in Ambazonia's southern zone, Friday. Unverifiable sources report that as many as 30 soldiers of La République du Cameroon were killed, many others wounded, and assault weapons abandoned.
Hey, they follow. They follow army there. Mama, man.
Sources say the Matrix fighters of aka John Yingfo masterminded the operation.
Happened in the village, Mundama village, in the outskirts of a Kona town. You can see the family crying.
A poor farmer who stepped out to fetch water for the family was shot and killed Saturday by Bia's genocidal forces in Mundemba, a locality near Ekona in the southern zone of Ambazonia.
This is a woman that the husband just left him for the farm. They want to come and fetch water in this neighboring village and was shot by the Cameroon forces. It happens today, the 23rd of February 2019.
Completely distraught and besides herself in tears and rolling in dust,
crying that the husband had just been killed for no just cause.
The wife weeps for the husband, eventually joined by other family members and friends.
These are citizens that have just flee away from the neighboring town and come to this village. And the forces of the French Cameroon, the terrorist forces that Mr. Pobi have just sent to Ambazonia, they keep on killing Ambazonia on a daily basis. We are calling on the United Nations, the AU, the UN. They should try and see. They should come in our rescue before the French Cameroon army, being influenced by the French President Emmanuel Macron, to kill all Ambazonians in cold blood.
A few feet away in the same video, another wasted life, cut short by an army that is now killing for sport.
This is what is happening in Ambazonia. This is a genocide that is going on in southern Cameroon. This is the act of genocide being committed by the terrorist forces of La République du Cameroon. These are citizens.
Eric Mbacha and Karine Tata are the 2019 winners of the Mount Cameroon Race of Hope. Threats and calls for boycott and a ghost town accounted for a pocket of people at the launch Friday at the Moliko Municipal Stadium and a heavily militarized BOYO Saturday as the fewest number of athletes ever registered for the race in the last 30 years or so made it up towards the Prime Minister's lodge, uptown BOYO and into the forest leading up the mountain. Eric Mbacha emerged winner in 4 hours and a little over 40 minutes, the third worst performance by a winning athlete in the last 23 years. Observers attributed to the prevailing crisis in Ambazonia, especially the fact that most of the winning team from Cambe was unable to train on its known hills for fear of their lives.
Ladies and gentlemen, the moment has come for us to hear what the Lord Mayor of the BOYO municipality has for us in his welcome address.
Meantime, on Friday, school dropout and certificate thieving Lord Mayor of BOYO, Patrick Ekema, eviscerated his perceived and imaginary CPD and political enemies for lacking the courage to attend the launching of the Mount BOYO Race of Hope.
We are thankful to you for beating out fear and other challenges which many of your peers find it difficult to beat, thus creating an atmosphere of electronic fear to our population.
The academic impostor, as well as his coterie of guests, including the Minister of Youth and Sports, were accompanied by heavily armed guards in armored cars, with the ministers all donning combat vests. In spite finding that 4 of 10 Ambazonian detainees that Cameroon abducted in Nigeria and has locked up in Yaoundé are actually refugees in Nigeria, the Kangaroo Special Military Tribunal in Yaoundé has declared itself competent to hear the case. The decision of the presiding military judge, Colonial Michel Mem, February 20th, not only raised questions about Cameroon's commitment to international statutes and conventions that it is supposedly signatory to, it caused the entire defense team to storm out of the court.
Lawyers walking out of the military tribunal.
This is crazy.
Larissa, what happened?
No, the judge just ruled and at the same time refusing us our right of appeal.
So what has happened?
No, lawyers walked out of the court.
A collective walkout.
A collective.
Telling us about mansion. What is mansion?
In a mansion, you admit documents and you declare yourself that you have jurisdiction to hear the matter, yet at the same time you say no. The accused people, they don't have a right to appeal because it's a mansion.
What is mansion, by the way? That's the word that are telling us.
So lawyers have walked out, the military tribunal. Lawyers have walked out.
The hearing will reportedly resume next month on March 7th. Staff at the St. Elizabeth Catholic General Hospital at Chisong has denied earlier social media reports purporting that the hospital or its renowned cardiac center had been set ablaze. In an official statement Monday, February 18th, the administration wrote, "Friends, we are very grateful for your concern. Chisong Hospital has not been burnt as you might have heard." End quote. But threats are on the rise and the dedicated staff are asking for the prayers of the righteous, especially as Bia's fire brigade has been accelerating the incidents of arson across Ambazonia, particularly around Bui Division, where over 40 homes across several communities were burnt in the course of the week, particularly on Friday.
The whole place burnt. The whole place destroyed.
We are here in Bamising at the family residence of the Auxiliary Bishop of Bamenda, Monsignor Kebibi. The house was burnt down, completely burnt down, and the bishop is here for a short visit and wants to actually see what happened.
You are listening to Ambazonia Calling, your space for educated news analysis, informed opinions, and commentary towards the recognition of a free, independent Ambazonia. I am Innocent here. Stay with us.
Don't go anywhere, Innocent. You've got the second part of our news summary for the week.
Yes, a Bali don't block road. Or they don't say to a ghost town. That day, we give we never stay for a wrong one for farm. We didn't have a batch with wrong farm. Even stay with corner road.
Sources say the United Bali forces of Ambazonia were on their first campaign Wednesday 20th, attacking the Gendarmerie Brigade at the entrance to the village in Jenka. Reports say as many as 10 soldiers of La République du Cameroon lost their lives, while 3 were seriously wounded.
Bali Wanda blocking. So as he did now, so now the block again was stone. One make a made a no way to did. They like Bali, they enter Bali 10,000. That 10,000 then I die people they all.
Oh, then I die people.
Yes, that's why they work there.
General Koraman reportedly led the United Bali forces. One volunteer fighter suffered a non-life-threatening gunshot wound to the foot. Meantime, sources say anti-restoration forces within Bali are working overtime, plotting how to reinstate Fondo Gwanyunga III and bring back life to normal in Bali. According to an intercepted communication, the anti-Ambazonian plotters intend to buy moderate Ambazonian voices of Bali extraction, especially the financial backbone in the diaspora, using the Bali Credit Union. As for unrepentant fighters, the anti-Ambazonian squad agreed that all should be done in collaboration with the elite force of Cameroon to eliminate Acid, Koraman, and Queen Mother, wherever it is they may be hiding. Sources have attributed extended electricity cuts during the first 2 weeks of February to the Macabre plan, and their ultimate failure resulted in the burning of over 35 houses as previously reported on Ambazonia Calling.
Oh God, I really waited this on Monday, so where that just shoot some boy nana to for a quarter. Oh God, I eat this so see blood. Where the boy did die? The boy did die, Papa God. Where the boy did die?
Dr. Samuel Ikome-Sako spent $30,000 or 18 million CFA francs to organize his birthday party. It is one of the unfortunately crunchy details revealed Monday 18th by Echu Tabenyang, the embattled Secretary of State for Finance and the Treasury of the self-styled interim government group. Speaking Tuesday on SCBC, Mr. Tabenyang, who previously served as Secretary at the Treasury for the Movement for the Restoration of the Independence of Southern Cameroon's Maurice, further confirmed that the IG has become a cash cow for Sako, who is reportedly on a monthly salary of $10,000, as well as other officers, including a Secretary of State for Communication, Chris Anu, who has been asking a monthly salary of $3,500. According to Echu Tabenyang, 90%, representing a minimum of $630,000 or 300 million francs of My Trip to Boya funds raised are in the pocketbooks of Samuel Sako and John Egwanyang, Sako's Secretary of Homeland Security. Some observers expected for Tabenyang to submit a letter of resignation, wondering how he can effectively work with the rest of the leadership of his organization when there is such a crying trust gap. La République du Cameroon has shot and killed a famous tragedy practitioner, Dr. Egbe, in MANYU. The shooting-killing occurred Tuesday, February 19th in his retirement home in Chang Village, Mamfe, after the genocidal forces burned down the home, a brick building that was way off the roadside. Sources close to the death suspect that La République du Cameroon are more than fighting Amba boys and have started going after perceived and imaginary enemies. Dr. Egbe served with distinction as an inspector of police until his retirement, when he later became a renowned traditional doctor. BIA genocidal forces have gone after medical professionals on suspicion that they are treating Amba boys, and have also gone after tradi practitioners, claiming Amba boys are getting mystical powers from this source. Finally, A former Secretary General at the Presidency of La République du Cameroon, Professor Titus Edjoa, has called on his former boss and buddy to initiate meaningful steps towards the resolution of the Ambazonian crisis. The one-time confidant and spiritual mentor of President Biya spoke to Le Jour, a local Cameroon news daily. It will be recalled that Professor Titus Edjoa fell from grace to grass and served over 15 years in Kondangi for political witch hunting that Biya reserves to imaginary and non-imaginary opponents. Innocentia, Ambazonia Calling.
One piece of information not included in that news summary that all Ambazonians should be looking out for in the course of this week, beginning Monday, before the United Nations Human Rights Commission in Geneva, is the Appeal for an HR, the Special Commission of Inquiry on Cameroon on human rights violations. This is significant. If granted, this will mean that they waive sovereignty for Cameroon and that they fill the mission to Cameroon on the basis of responsibility to protect, which is a very major first step. But we have to watch out for that. Cameroon is a member of that Do Nothing, See No Harm Human Rights Commission of the United Nations, one that the United States bolted out of. We will see how the commission behaves. We will understand whether this is a dog with teeth that barks and bites, or it is just a toothless bulldog.
Welcome to our special interview segment, The Devil Unmasked, The Truth Out. Hello, welcome Jeff McCoy. Jeff McCoy is producer here at Ambazonia Calling.
Thank you, Bo. I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me on the show today.
Absolutely great pleasure here to have you doing The Devil Unmasked in the absence of Professor Emmanuel Tatanmenta, whom you know a lot.
Yes, he's done a wonderful job throughout this program, hasn't he?
Yep, thanks. And, you know, we're going to try today to unmask the similarities between the Ambazonian Independence War and the American Independence War. This is a tall order, trying to compare two wars centuries apart.
It is. There's different weapons, there's different techniques, there's a whole lot of things that are different. But however, we do have to take a look at how many things are similar. You have two nations attempting to be born into independence with free men, and for their people, they were willing to take a lot of risk and make a lot of sacrifices. Both sides were, the American side, and what we're seeing with the Amba boys right now is, you know, what appears to be far superior military might against them, but yet they both still found a way to continue that and take the battle right to the enemy.
When you read about the American War of Independence, it looks like everyone was in agreement. Was that the case?
No, not entirely. Now, there were some things that are a little bit different. They did have the Continental Congress, and the Continental Congress was, the general population agreed that they were the Congress, that they were the authority.
They were elected.
Yes, they were, but they also were not, you know, they weren't in agreement all the time. Some people, everybody was pretty much in agreement on the taxation without representation issue, but not everyone was in agreement on independence, because independence was a big risk for them at that time. You're separating yourself from the most powerful nation in the world, and you really don't have a whole lot to do that, you know, and that was an issue, but they did work it out.
So there you have another similarity with the Ambazonian situation, where you also have divisions amongst the group. But the unifying factor was here that they had elected officials whom they respected.
That's right. And also, in addition to that Congress had great authority. And they were the ones that were actually selected George Washington to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, if you want to call it that.
Talk about that selection, because before we had in the American Independence War a bit what you have with the Ambazonian War, where you have several commanders of different units fighting for the same thing, but no coordination. Is that what happened?
To a degree, yes. What we had prior to the American Revolutionary War was the French and Indian War. In some ways, you could say it's actually the first world war. It was global, but a lot of it was fought, you know, here in this frontier of America the eastern seaboard, going pretty much to Pittsburgh, and then moving north into Canada. That was kind of the battleground. The British were fighting against the French, and of course it was over the owning the real estate and everything else that they were trying to get a hold of. But George Washington at the time had many defeats during that time. He really didn't do all that well in that war all the time, but he was fearless, and he did lead his men, and so he had the respect of the men. And then when Congress came into this war, the Revolutionary War, they selected George Washington to be the commander, and once again he had, you know, huge setback after setback. He was defeated over and over and over again. If you look back on it, it's easy to say there's no way that they could win. You know, they just kept getting their lunch handed to them, and then finally, you know, they had a few decisive battles, and that's what started to make the change. But the people were still supportive of what the effort that was underway.
We come to another similarity there, the fact that defeat was staring them in the eye, and that they needed to go out there and snatch victory basically from the jaws of the lion.
That's right. And the thing is, defeat for them would not have been surrender. Everybody that signed that Declaration of Independence, and anybody that was a commander or senior officer, would have been facing execution for sure. They signed their own death warrant when they signed that.
Again, another similarity. Amber boys are being called upon today to surrender their weapons. They cannot do it because they're going to get executed.
That's right. Yeah, and so that makes them a highly motivated and dedicated force, you know, and if you look at where they're coming from, how this started, you know, but we've seen a lot of this evolution during the whole time of doing this radio show, you know, over and over. I'm amazed at how they're coming out with no shoes, not enough weapons, you know, but yet they still keep taking the battle to the enemy. And they've gained it so much now. Now you have some Amber boys that are fairly experienced warriors. They know a little bit more about what they're coming up against. And I think that ultimately will allow a shift to take place where you'll see Ambazonia, you know, flying their flag.
Another similarity here, there were 13 colonies at the outset with respect to the United States. There are 13 states in Ambazonia fighting for this independence war.
That's right. And, you know, it took a lot of...
Is it just a number?
Yeah, it's amazing. But, you know, what I can tell you for sure is that just like in America, they got to be sure that everybody's pretty much in agreement. There were so many things that the average, even a lot of the soldiers, did not want to sign on for a long term of war. They just thought, you know, let's get these taxes reduced and everything else. When the king continued to tax them, they basically said, this is it, we're going to fight against this. But the king didn't just send a letter and say, no, you won't. He sent men, many men, and it just kept getting coats. Yes, the red coats were coming, and they did show up in force. And they had the greatest navy in the world at the time, parked right off the water for them. They had a supply line that was unlimited. So, you know, it was just no way that you could win this war. And yet here we are, the United States of America, a free and independent nation today, one of the most powerful nations in the world.
Now, that freedom didn't just come to America. Someone like Benjamin Franklin, negotiating with the French for support, ended up spreading some of that freedom elsewhere.
Right. Actually, that was kind of a unique situation, to put it that way, because Benjamin Franklin was asking the French to support the United States of America, this new country. They did not want to do it. They weren't sure that there was going to be victory, but there, towards the end, the French did step in and help. And then eventually, that freedom that the French people witnessed became their battle cry, and eventually they had a change. And
they had the storming of the Bastille, and they wanted some of that freedom for France as well.
Yeah, and you know, Bo, it just goes to prove how far a man will go to fight for his freedom. You know, it's God-given, it's built into you at birth.
And talk to me about the people of America during that war. I mean, they were going through the kind of suffering that the people of Ambazonia have to go through today, the sacrifices they had to make. But what was at the end of the tunnel was so much more attractive than the life they had been living, that they were willing to go through that sacrifice.
And in some of the times, the sacrifice was the loss of their own lives, but they were willing to do that. You're right. And the thing that you have to remember, too, these guys also started out without enough weapons. they did not have heavy guns. There was no cannons at that time for them. Now, eventually, they got some cannons and put them to use. And initially, it looks like Washington spent a lot of time in retreat. You know, he was just constantly getting pinned, and it was a mess, and it really broke the morale of the men. They really, really suffered through that. And eventually, though, some victories did help turn around. They became very motivated as he kept seeing themselves becoming more and more successful.
Every time you mention Washington, I want to come back to this comparison with Ambazonia, which is that there were not 13 armies for the 13 colonies going out there to face the Brits.
That's
it
right.
was Washington leading a national army, a continental army of the United States against the Brits.
That's right. And also, there was one commander-in-chief, and that was George Washington. However, Washington, you know, the decisions that were made from that command position applied across the board. It was everybody. Now, Washington was good to compromise with his senior officers. He did meet with them often. He listened often, and sometimes he even changed his own mind by listening to what his men had to say. Other times he stuck to his guns and he went through with his plan, but he was very open. There was a lot that was going into that, you know, these decisions that were being made.
One of the things you mentioned, Amber boys coming out barefoot, without guns, you know, just fighting with the spirit that we must get freedom, we must get the dignity that we deserve. And you have scenes in the American War where people were the same way, no shoes and in the middle of the snow.
Right. Yeah, so they got pinned into the Delaware River. They crossed that river at night. That was an icy river. It was a very dangerous crossing. They basically did that to escape guaranteed defeat in the morning. But they made several marches in the snow without shoes. And a lot of times, you know, like, for example, one of the statues of the king was in New Jersey, I believe it was, and they tore the statue down and ended up making like 4,000 bullets out of it. They melted it down and made bullets and took that back to the battle. So there was a lot of stuff that they were doing. They were supplying themselves as they were moving. It wasn't like today's United States Army. There's a budget for them. So the United States Army today is not going to go anywhere unless there's medical supplies, food, ammunition. All the logistics is going to stay forward with those men and women that are fighting today. But back then, they didn't have that.
But, you know, it's easy also to think that an army that's fighting an incredible opponent like the Brits, that they don't have any control of the land. But basically, you had a situation here where American forces had some control of the land, was never acknowledged by the Brits, which is the situation you have with the Amber boys controlling most of the rural Ambazonia. The government and government troops are now, you know, kind of in major urban centers, but they claim that they control the land.
Right.
Talk to me about control of land with respect to the American independence.
Well, you know, in one of the battles in New Jersey, as the Continental Army did achieve victory, the British Army made a very hasty retreat and basically outran the Continental Army. However, the entire trip from that point all the way back to the ocean, they were fired upon by different militia groups that were coming out. The British at that point had no way out. They were only trying to retreat to get back out of there because they took a beating for, you know, maybe 100 miles during this retreat. They just couldn't make any progress because every time they did, they'd have a handful of militia guys that would just come up on the road and start shooting them. So, you know, those are the things that I see a lot of times where I'm looking at the government forces today in Ambazonia. You know, they're talking a tough talk, but they are grouped together. They're not taking chances. So that tells me that already they're afraid. They're afraid because if they weren't afraid, they would be out there in a squad size or a company size of men and just go wherever they want. And they are able to go where they want, but it's only for one purpose. It's direct. They're not trying to make any stops. You know, you see that kind of thing. It's easy to control one little area. And they know that they can't control all of it, and I think that shows a sure sign of fear of Amber boys.
The other thing is, and here, must be comforting for Amber boys to hear, is that when the Brits came out, they thought this was going to be a holiday. They were out. What were they doing in the battlefield, the soldiers?
Yeah.
They were having a party.
Yeah, they were actually, it was tea time a lot. You know, they discounted the strength or the determination of the Americans. They really felt that we're so superior. When we show up, you're going to crumble and take off. That's what they thought. And, you know, and that's not what happened. So, yes, they took breaks. They stopped in the hard, cold times. They would try to go inside. One of the senior British officers, a general, was having an affair with a woman that he was staying behind for her, you know. And so Washington found all these weaknesses, and he took advantage of it.
Now, there was something also with Washington. When he was hired as the commander, there was something he did about money, which was remarkable. The salary that was offered him.
Oh, yes. Washington, he really wanted the position of commander, and he was lobbying in a way for that position. But the pay, even as later as he became president, and the Constitution was still trying to be worked out, they were still ratifying a lot of parts of it. But it could have been easily that Washington could have taken a position as a king instead of a president. But he turned it down. That would have set him up for life. You know, he would have really had it made. But he felt that America would be better to be served by rotating presidents on an election from the people, and to be represented by the people in Congress, and that would be the best form of government. And it has worked out, for the most part, fairly well.
A little bit back to the beginning here. When you mention taxation without representation, you were speaking here exactly about, you know, the king just using the United States. I mean, the King of England, George V, just using the United States like a farm, like a plantation, and taking out everything the same way the King of Cameroon is doing now with Ambazonia.
Yes, absolutely, because they were looking at it that this is our colony. There are natural resources here, and we're going to exploit it. You know, and while we're doing that, we're going to tax the people. So, you know, they just really felt that that's exactly the way, that was what was best for them, and what wasn't best for the Americans.
And in addition, and similar to Ambazonia, Americans were also just getting marginalized. Someone like Washington was marginalized.
Right, and well, yes, he was. He served well in the French and Indian War. He did have some setbacks, but they would never commission him as a British officer. You know, and eventually that came back to haunt him, because the Continental Army said, we're going to make you a commissioned officer, but also a commander. You're the commander-in-chief. And you know, that shows I have a lot of respect for Washington. He made so many mistakes, but at the same time, he was not self-serving. He wanted to do what was best for the country and for his men. And he really, he gained the support and respect of his men, and that's why they marched in the snow without their shoes, and that's why they marched without enough ammunition, because they felt that they could follow him right into a new nation.
So if you take all of this experiences with respect to the United States Independence War and watching the Ambazonian War for so many months right now, what kind of advice would you be giving to people who are pursuing this from a military point of view and from a political point of view? How much better and in which direction should Ambazonians organize? Well, actually, I would say the biggest thing is to be united in their representation. There has to be one group that's actually going to make the leading, you know, to set the policies. And that also would include declaring a war, to set the, you know, new standards in place so that when victory is achieved, that this can go about fairly smoothly. And then the other thing is, I would hope that that governing body would also find ways to assist, you know, just like Congress does today, in the military and military affairs, which would also include making sure that they were supplied, trained, and having everything that they need. Those are very important things. There has to be a united front, because if you don't, you're going to end up in another war that, like what we have here in America, and that was a civil war where there was so much conflict and separation. You know, we actually almost imploded our free nation. We almost collapsed during that war, and you don't want to get it down that road. You know, that now you're making some great progress. It's time to keep moving with it. And if you were to talk to this, you know, the most formidable army I've seen in all my life, the Amber Boys, because some of them happen to be my junior brothers, the majority of them, I have never seen this kind of courage anywhere in the world, and maybe because I've not watched every war up front the way I'm watching the Amber War. But I just have so much respect for them, but I would let you speak to them. What would you tell them?
Well, actually, I would have to say that I also have that same type of respect. It's so easy to sit here and say, I wouldn't take this. I would go out on the battlefield and fight right now. That's easy for me to say while I'm sitting in the studio here. These guys are very determined, and this is for real. You can be dead in a minute, but yet these still go. And what is, when they're so underfunded, and I look at this and say that is nothing but absolutely heroic action to go out and fight for your independence like that when you are going again. I mean, like we talked about it, Bo, talking about the video of them chasing after an armored personnel carrier. That's just suicide practically, because that you can't shoot through it. They didn't even have a gun to shoot at it, but yet it still set the enemy on a retreat. So that just psychologically, that has to affect a well-equipped soldier who's got all the brand new equipment. We just looked at a photo here a minute ago. That's a brand new piece of equipment, and yet you're on a retreat from some guys that are charging you without a weapon. You've got to be afraid.
You have served, so you know what it means to be up in arms, and you are really describing there from the position of someone who has been in the military. You would be scared to death to see young men without any much equipment, willing to put their lives on the line to come for you.
That's right, because that tells me they have no fear. I can't make them be afraid with my armored personnel carrier, my 60 caliber machine gun, all of my flak vest helmets and everything else that I have. If they're not afraid of that, then I don't have any more aces up my sleeve. I can't do anything additional to them now, and they're willing to take that stand. For sure, as the enemy, as the government forces knows that if we go here, we're going to be engaged, and I might end up being dead. They already know that because these guys have proven it over and over and over again. So that's something to consider. I mean, it's very impressive to sit here and witness this.
I have to say, this is all the time we've got, Jeff. We could carry on this conversation until the war is over.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think we've got to stop here for today. And I'd like to thank you very much for all the work you do here at Ambazonia Calling, for all the work we do with Africa Freedom Network, all the work we do with the Missions Tribune, one of the biggest supporters of the Ambazonian War, and we've been carrying it on the front page of the paper so many times. Yeah. And just asking for all the support that could come the way of.
Well, the Amber Boys can count on that. We'll continue to carry their stories up front and forward all the time.
Thank you very much. That was Jeff McCoy, the producer here at Ambazonia Calling.
Thank you, Bo.
This is Ambazonia. One nation, one soul, one people. Sacrificing, bleeding, and yes, dying if need be, until we kick the colonialists out and enthrone a government of the people in BOYO. Ambazonians living in the homeland shoulder the burden and pay the highest price for independence for Mother Ambazonia. Not so other Ambazonians who live in colonial Cameroon, for whom the monk, from Ibalikumato Vetzekov himself, has the following message.
Ambazonians living in the Republic of Cameroon, are you ready to be free? It is now almost 3 years since the crisis in the Cameroon started. It is now 15 months since Paul Biya and his evil regime declared war on Ambazonia. The brunt of the war has been borne mostly by citizens living and working in Ambazonia. Those lucky to be still alive are either running for their lives or hiding from the brutal and inhumane treatment of Biya's colonial forces of occupation or groups of thugs, criminals, and well-equipped pro-colonizer militia. If you are a citizen of Ambazonia, you know it already in your heart of hearts. Some of our MPs have alluded to this fact several times and will do so again and again. If you are a citizen of Ambazonia, you know. No one really needs to quote any Bible verses to convince you. Living in the house of exile, that is the Republic of Cameroon, staying on in Egypt may work for self-preservation. Hiding successfully in another man's land is like running successfully away from your shadow. You will never be free until all Ambazonians are free. Ambazonia still has a pending independence case at the UN that France, the Republic of Cameroon, and the rest of France-Afrique are trying to run circles around. And you can play a role in advancing that case. Not without the war. What our people raised to this crisis level in 2016 is not a new demand. The history of British Southern Cameroons is impossible to write without highlighting the consistent and persistent demands of our people, especially, surprise, surprise, loud demands by our traditional rulers, the chiefs and fonts, for outright independence. In the minds of our ancestors was the question: what is the problem with the independence of Southern Cameroons? Simple. Before colonization, we were a free people. After decolonization, why is our freedom even up for discussion? The game France and the Republic of Cameroon are playing today was played previously by UK diplomats, including the Secretary for the Colonies, the Governor-General for Nigeria and Cameroons, the UK representatives at the UN, French representatives at the UN, the French Foreign Office or Quai d'Orsay. They thought they had dribbled us into dizziness and scored the winning goals, only to wake up to smell the coffee of our people still bubbling with energy, consistent and persistent with their demands for freedom, dignity, and the pursuit of happiness in a self-governing, fully independent Ambazonia. Talk of running from your shadow. The pre-independence stranglehold on our forebears to choose between the devil, the Republic of Cameroon, and the deep blue sea, Nigeria, has been acknowledged by their descendants as a sacrifice too big to offer at the altar of the gods of imperialism. Remain a region in Nigeria or join French Cameroon as, quote, one of two states equal in status, end quote, can only be acceptable to Ambazonians if Americans would have accepted, in lieu of outright independence in 1886, the choice of remaining an integral part of the UK or joining as part of France. The one thing we know about those who lived in Nigeria, meaning those who lived in the house of exile of that hyperactive period in our history, is that they were not indifferent. They were not spectators of their own liberation. They were actors in many dramatic events, from the walkout of the Enugu House through the setting up of a self-governing territory in 1954. One thing remained constant and came up consistently in the raucous debates between Ndele, Fancha, Kale, Joa, and a host of other proud Ambalanders. They never got tired repeating the word independence. If you live and work in French Cameroon, know in your heart of hearts that the anthropological truth about our state from the time that the bells of decolonization started ringing can only be restored by independence. Our forebears believed, lived, and died with that wish in their hearts, and with their everyday prayer to God being a plea that a generation like ours will come along and muster the courage to fight until independence comes. They bequeathed a dream to us, their children. If you live and work in Colonial Cameroon, do your part in supporting our people's march to freedom. A free, independent Ambazonia is coming. However hard the BIA regime tries to sabotage that dream. I know I'm ready, but I must ask you, as a Christian song does, are you ready to be free? This is the monk from Ibalikumato for Ambazonia Calling.
Restoration, restoration, restoration train is going to the borders.
Ntumfoyn.
Restoration train is going straight to Kumba.
Ntumfoyn.
Restoration train is going on to Bali.
Ntumfoyn.
Restoration train is going to Victoria. Restoration train is going to Muyuka
and to Ekok.
We don't do foolish, but when there are capital fools out there, we make it our duty to find them, and every week we crown one of them the Nyamfuka of the Week.
Here is Veronique Vetumfe with a rundown of the kings and queens of foolish for the week.
Finishing in third place this week is the Minister of Sports of Colonial Cameroon. For over a month now, he has been encouraging athletes to travel to BOYO and participate in the outlawed race up and down Mount Ambazonia in BOYO. The minister told tall tales of how secured BOYO was for the race, suggesting that Amber Boys did not represent a real threat. Yet, on the eve of the race, the minister was compelled by threats from the same Amber Boys to spend the night in Victoria. On the actual day of the race yesterday, he had to be escorted in and around BOYO in an armored personnel carrier, strapped into one of the seats, tightly tied into seat belts, sporting a life vest and a bulletproof jacket and protective headgear. Question is, why fool athletes into risking their lives, whereas this dishonorable minister, Mwele Kombi-Narcisse, did not feel safe enough, guarded by heavily armed bodyguards? For trying to pull a fast one on athletes, Mwele Kombi-Narcisse is this week's third place finisher for the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
Finishing in the position of runners-up this week are a host of people within the IG group, beginning with, but definitely not ending with, Chris Anu, who spent another week in hysteria, fleeing from their own shadows, frightened by the real possibility that they would be ousted from the so-called government during the APNC convention in Philadelphia. They have become so afraid that they are inventing stories to discourage participation at the conference in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, here in the United States. The biggest and single most hilarious claim is that somehow the BIA regime has sent soldiers, policemen, and gendarmes who will be in Philadelphia to abduct Ambazonia leaders and repatriate them to the Cameroons. You have to be living in Mars and to have no knowledge of how the United States function to believe such falsehoods. Yet, those are the kinds of lies that are being hashed and told on the APNC by the likes of Chris Anu, who this week has earned the runners-up position for the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
Finishing at the top of the charts and lifting the trophy for foolishness this week is Cameroon's Minister for Propaganda. This week he repeated claims which the regime made in interviews aired on the video recently released online by the Washington Post. According to the confession, the terrorists in power in Yaoundé admit that they have burned down homes, but they qualify such homes as training camps for Amber boys. This is the same René Sadi who, along with Paul Atanganji and the French Secret Services, masterminded the abduction and rendition of the Naira 10 from Abuja, Nigeria to Yaoundé, Cameroon. Without need for training, René Sadi is off to a great start as Minister of Lies, telling some falsehoods that even Concho Komeni, Zero More, would have been ashamed to tell. René Sadi tried to sell the falsehood to the world that the Kumba District Hospital was not burned down by Cameroonian terrorist forces. For the ease of transition into the lies that is the job of Minister of Communications, René Sadi is this week's unchallenged winner of the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
This is Veronique Vetimfe for Ambazonia Calling.
Nyamfuka them all.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Because you have your army of occupation out in West Cameroon, you believe that when the people will rise, even if you took the whole of the French army and added to yours, you will never bring them down.
And I call on all Cameroon soldiers to lay down their arms within Ambazonia and to turn their arms against the very system that has made them slaves in the land of their birth.
For more stories from around the world, go to the World Wide Web at themissionstribune.com, compassfreepress.com, and africafreedomnetwork.com.
Here is our letter to Joshua.
Dear Joshua, if you had your way, the earth would stop rotating around the sun. Everything, including the earth, would rotate around you instead. God would take orders from you. Satan would be your errand boy. The angels of God would be your lobbyists. And God forbid that your reign would last only until world without end, when it could last for eternity without end. You would not allow the devil to tempt you only with the forbidden fruit from the Garden of Eden. You would eat every fruit, forbidden or not, from that garden and all gardens. Your reign as king, what am I saying? Your reign as God himself would continue even after Jesus comes again. It is such infatuation with power that big book people call tyranny, power-drunk rulers. Except that you do not rule. You reign, Joshua. Everyone who wants to survive your abuse must be at your feet or transform into the carpet on which you rest your feet. Even the once powerful opponents to your reign have been broken. You have shattered the chains of goodness that held them away from being conquered by the evil you incarnate. Think of it, Joshua. There was a time when the mere mention of the likes of Ntumfoyn and His Eminence Christian Cardinal to me gave you splitting headaches. They sent cold chills down your political spine. There was a time when those two notably could beat you up with the truth their tongues profess. Nowadays, it would seem, no weapon fashioned against your evil prospers, Joshua. John has lost his sting. The most powerful authority within the Catholic Church, very strangely, has joined the likes of Simon Munzo in crossing the carpet. Now they work full-time on subverting the will of an overwhelming majority of Ambazonians who make no secret of their wholehearted support for outright independence. Joshua, I'm amazed that you have been able to recruit the Cardinal, the one person who was shocked and outraged by a French official at the Holy See confessing that part of their work in the Cameroons was to assimilate Ambazonians into small French people. What have you done to the Cardinal, Joshua? Why have you, as our people would say, eaten him up in Famla? Why, Joshua? If I were the Cardinal, I would worry, Joshua. I would seriously worry, because your type of Famla is the one that I'm afraid could cause someone to deny Christ 3 times before the cock crows thrice on the day the AGC opens its doors in BOYO. You are not good, Joshua. I know you were bad, but to that point, I could bet my last dollar you were much less capable of causing your ears to see your eyes. Now I know better. By the power of some form of hypnotism and along with state-of-the-art voodooism, you are pursuing the same otomoko which you used to cause 2 popes to visit Cameroon in rapid succession. How do you achieve these feats, Joshua? To be for federalism, by the way, is not being moderate. It is not being a peacemaker. It is simply being a stubborn minority masquerading as a peacemaker. Joshua would even understand if choosing to defend federalism was defending what is right. But Ngang, defending federalism is to pretend that this minority position represents justice and or that it is right. You are bad, Joshua. You have convinced them, every one of them, that by advocating federalism, they are moderates and not terrorists. Tell them that they are subverting the will of the majority of our people. Today, millions of Ambazonians are not vexed at that French diplomat who explained to the Cardinal at the Holy See that they were assimilating Ambazonians into French people. Today, Ambazonians are mesmerized. They are annoyed by their own Cardinal signing up to facilitate the same service for the French that he proclaimed he was so vexed by when he was first told at the Holy See. I say these things to congratulate you, Joshua, for successfully convincing one of the brightest of Ambazonians alive to forget the many decades when your regime ran those infamous commandements opérationnels, executing and disappearing thousands of people in the Bois de Singe area in Douala and up north. You are bad, Joshua, to be able to convince the Cardinal to take a position that is not aligned with the position of the bishops of Ambazonia. Congratulations, Joshua. The most formidable opponents you have had throughout your reign of fear and terror, you managed to switch in old age from the belief the once professed in opposition to you to designing and giving such clout to a minority position. In the light of your ability to hypnotize even the Cardinal, many of us are holding our breath to hear if truly the Cardinal in this day and age, and given how far the people of Ambazonia have come and how many have made the ultimate sacrifice, if the Cardinal is really willing, along with those working with him and for him on the initiative called the AGC, are willing to go down in history as the Muna of this age, siding with the emperor in power and selling their people into slavery in Egypt while doing so. Joshua, I know that you have, as our people in Bamileke country would say, you have locked up so many people in the famla of power into which you offer the blood of the slain Ambazonian. But could I make just one request in prayer to you this Sunday? Could you please kindly keep Tumi prisoner if you want, but for goodness sake, release our Cardinal to us, please. You have been listening to Ambazonia Calling. We came to you from our studios here in Washington, D.C. Our producers today, Jeff McCoy, Logistics, Joe Costa, and Krista Cunningham. Our music is from Ken Wanaku, the monk, from Balikumato Vazekov himself, from William Ford, an Amber music star of blessed memory, from Eric Matisse on the web at soundimage.org, and from Prince BOYO of Ajam, Sonicatron, USA. Ambazonia Calling is a joint production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. You can find us on the web at missionstribune.com, at compassfreepress.com, and at africafreedomnetwork.com. Next Sunday is another date. Until then, keep the spirit, keep the faith, keep up the good fight for justice and independence for Ambazonia. Stay Amba strong.